How important would you all say it is to blend in with the locals? When it comes to tipping, I'd say it's very important. It's all about knowledge, to be honest. Different cultures, different countries. If you do your research, you can avoid disaster by tipping or not tipping. In the 2 years that I've worked as a server, you'd be surprised at how many people don't know what they're doing when it comes to tips. Foreigners come in all the time, leave you 5 to 10%. When you're running, they work you harder than other people. They blame you for bad service. They'll blame you for bad food, which really isn't your fault. It goes to the kitchen. They'll blame you for, they don't care enough, or like I said, they're not aware of their local customs. So I'm going to start with the history of tipping, and it goes back to, it began in the U.S. in the late 1800s, about right after the Civil War ended. Upper class Americans would go to Europe and they'd see the aristocrats over there tipping and kind of using it to show off their wealth and their higher education status. So the Americans came back to the U.S. and they were like, look at me, I'm fancy because I'm doing all this from Europe, and look at me, and I'm better than you, that sort of thing. So it actually wasn't very popular at first. Everybody was very worried about it because people in the U.S. fought for so long to not have a class system and to not, rely on other people. So what it did back then, or they were afraid of, was the formation of a serving class, a class that would always be dependent on an upper class giving them money. It was kind of like living off their scraps and all. So it was very unpopular. But basically it was just to flaunt your wealth and get all that over with. It originally started in the 17th century, in 17th century England actually, in the taverns, and TIP is actually an acronym. It stands for to ensure promptness. And, it's just, you give them the extra money so they would be attentive, they would make sure they filled your drinks up when they needed it, always were in a friendly mood, kind of like paying for friends almost, or that sort of thing. It's, like I said, it wasn't very popular. There were actually a few states, about 6 of them I believe. It was Wisconsin, Illinois, Iowa, Nebraska, Tennessee, and South Carolina. They all tried to pass a law where tipping would actually be illegal, which shocked me, and that was 1915 when they tried to do that. So it took a little bit, and it failed to pass, obviously, and we're still doing it today. So kind of, ask yourself, do you think it affects class system? Do you think people look down on servers because they're making their money that way, or not? I kind of like it. I think, you can make a lot of money doing it, as long as you know what you're doing and have some knowledge, and it's worth it, Every place around the world has different customary traditions for tipping. Certain places like Germany, usually it's 10% or sometimes not at all. Places overseas, a lot of times now, they get a salary. And if you tip them on top of that, they believe that you're looking down on them for that reason. Kind of like, what, you don't think I can support my family? You don't think I can support my kids? You don't think I can support my mom, my dad? I don't need your money. I don't need your pity. So you got to be careful about that. Some people will get offended if you don't tip them. Some will be offended if you do. Tourists around here in the States, most of them just aren't aware of American customs. And when I went overseas, I made sure to research all that and see what I was doing and try to be respectful of their customs. But a lot of times, I'll get a table, there will be, a bunch of Spanish people, and they, hardly speak English. I have to try really hard to take their order, and then they ask me for all sorts of extra stuff. I do it for them, of course, but then I kind of realize that I'm going to get 5–10% and kind of just leave them to their own business and don't worry about them too much. It's not really the greatest thing to do, kind of ashamed, but if I'm not getting paid for it, I don't want to work really hard for something like that. Servers get paid very little amount of money in the States. It's about, and the lowest it goes is $2.13 per hour that you can make here in America, which which surprised me, because in Florida, I guess we have it pretty good at $4.91. Still doesn't seem like a lot, though. The main thing is tipping according to service. Say if you have 10%, if I see that on my tip, I know that you weren't very happy. I did something wrong, you were upset with me, I didn't deserve a tip. I'd say 15% is like if I'm serving breakfast or if I'm working at Denny's or something. That would be, perfect service for that average kind of location. 20% is, at a nice sit-down restaurant. That is excellent service, perfect, everything was exceptional. And then anything above that, 20-25%, is above and beyond. And actually in places like New York and fine dining restaurants, it is sometimes customary to tip 20-25% for perfect service. So it's really a team effort though, and the server isn't getting all of his tips. He's got to tip out all the people under him, like the food runner, he's got to tip out the busboy, he's got to tip out the host, he's got to tip out dishwasher even, because they all help each other out. And you got to have a good relationship with your kitchen. You have to talk to them, communicate. They take care of you, you take care of them. If you don't have a good relationship with the kitchen, then you're not going to sell their specials, and they're not going to give you the right temperatures and stuff on your food. Or they'll maybe be a little bit slower when your food comes out, which you don't want. You want fast service, and that's how you do well. Your steps of service right away, you show up to your table, you talk to them, you bring them your drinks, you take your order, which is the most important thing, ask all your temperatures, get all your sides right, bring it in, then you talk to the kitchen. You have an expo most likely, and he's the guy who communicates between the server and the expo. He's like the middleman, or between the cook and the server, and he makes sure everything's right. And you do all that, and then you got your food runner who gets tipped out, usually about 3-4% your food runner gets. And if your food runner takes out the wrong entree to the wrong table, that makes the server look bad. He's getting paid the same amount of money off your tips. But if your tips are lower, then he's not making enough. So you kind of have to, everybody scratches each other's back, if that makes sense. And, a lot of times it's not your server's fault. A lot of times somebody's just being a jerk. Or I had a table the other day when they wanted a plain burger with lettuce, tomato, onion, and mayo. So I rang it in, sent it back to the kitchen perfectly on the ticket, and it comes out just a plain burger. And my expo took it out without the lettuce, tomato, onion, without the mayonnaise, nothing like that. And the guy tipped me. It was like a $15 check. I would have gotten $3, but he didn't give me any $3. And I was like, well, dude, that really wasn't my fault. Don't be mad at me. I rang it in the right way. So a lot of times people aren't aware of that, and just kind of be conscious. Think about how if you see your server working hard, running around with 6 open tables, maybe cut them some slack. Realize they're there on holidays, Valentine's Day, Mother's Day, Christmas Eve, Easter. You name it, they're always working. And sometimes those are good days, sometimes they're really not. Just, sometimes just ask yourself if it's worth the extra 5-10%. It really makes a difference to them. And really, say thank you, because they appreciate that too.